Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. Today, I'm doing things a little differently and sharing with you a preview of another podcast I enjoy and think you will too. It's called A Slight Change of Plans. On A Slight Change of Plans, Dr. Maya Shankar, a cognitive scientist who is an expert on human behaviors, examines who we are and who we become in the face of big change. Maya has intimate conversations with people who have faced incredible transformations, people like Casey Musgrave, Amanda Knox, as well as everyday inspirations like Richard Harris, an Australian doctor who rescued a boys' soccer team trapped deep inside a cave in Thailand. In this preview, Maya sits down with four-time Grammy-winning musician Jason Isbell. Hailed as one of the best singer-songwriters of his generation, Jason seems to have it all, but that wasn't always the case. His early career was plagued by addiction, and it's something that shows up time and time again in his music, which you'll hear when he plays a few special song clips in this episode. He joins Maya to talk about how getting sober allowed him to re-examine aspects of his personality that he once saw as his greatest weakness. You'll find Maya and Jason's conversation to be relatable, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. You can hear more from A Slight Change of Plans wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy.
It seems to me like there were just unresolved issues from my childhood that took me from a user to an abuser as far as drugs and alcohol went. And, you know, I feel like there was a part of me in my 20s that was saying, okay, let's see what happens. You know, let's just see what happens when you do those things.
That's Jason Isbell, a musician heralded by critics as one of the leading singer-songwriters of our time. Jason's won 4 Grammy Awards. You may have heard his hit song, Cover Me Up, from his blockbuster album, Southeastern. Over the years, Jason has been open about his struggles with alcohol and drugs and what it's taken for him to become sober. His recovery has involved revisiting some core assumptions about who he was then and who he is today. And one way he gained a better understanding of himself is through his music.
There was a huge shift in the reason I wrote songs around that period of time. Up until that point, I had been writing for an external audience. You know, this is my family, this is my father, this is the place where I grew up. But then I sort of, you know, unconsciously started writing songs where I was looking at myself and I was trying to make some sort of estimation of who I was and if I was doing okay.
On today's show, why Jason Isbell believes you don't have to reject your past in order to live a better future. I'm Maya Shankar, and this is A Slight Change of Plans, a show about who we are and who we become in the face of a big change. I love Jason Isbell's music. Not only because he writes beautiful, stirring melodies, but because of how he approaches storytelling. He captures life's challenges, like navigating addiction and recovery, in their full complexity. Jason and I began our conversation by talking about his childhood and musical influences. He grew up in Alabama and was exposed to a wide range of music from an early age. We're talking gospel, bluegrass, and country. His grandfather, a Pentecostal preacher, played instruments like the banjo and guitar, and would often invite Jason to join him.
And the thing that really got me hooked from early on, if I would play rhythm guitar for him, he would play like a lead instrument like mandolin or banjo or fiddle. And if I would make it through a couple of hours of playing rhythm guitar, he would reward me by laying the guitar in his lap and tuning it to an open tuning and playing blues music with his pocket knife. He would use his pocket knife as a slide, and that was my reward. And that was the thing that I really loved the most.
So you continue playing the guitar well into your teenage years, and there's this one day where you're waiting tables at a local restaurant, and a coworker asks if you'd like to open for him at an upcoming show at a coffee shop. And he says to you that you're going to need to perform 30 minutes of original music the following day. So the next day, which you don't actually have.
Right.
But what was your response?
Yeah, I told him that's no problem. I got all kinds of songs, easy, And then I thought I got to go home and write some songs. So that's what I did. I sat up all night. I remember I was drinking Gatorade and Everclear, and I stayed up and wrote like half an hour's worth of songs. I remember just flipping back and forth through the notebook, adding something here, go back, add something here, take something out here, and then played it all back and like looked at my watch and saw, okay, that's about 30 minutes, so that'll do. And I wrote all those at once, just as quickly as I could, and that wound up being the first songs of mine that anybody heard. And it was also kind of, I think, when you're working on that kind of a deadline, or when you're just in this sort of like manic output period, sometimes it turns off the critic in your brain, because you don't have time to judge what you're doing. You're just being creative. So there's something, I think, beneficial to that sometimes.
You say it so nonchalantly, Jason. So matter of fact, like, yeah, so I told him, oh yeah, that's no problem. I got it. But what gave you the confidence in that moment to say, yeah, I'm going to be able to generate 30 minutes of original music tonight? Like, did you always have this feeling that there was so much you wanted to say?
Yes, Maya, I don't know if you have noticed this, but I'm a white man. And that is what gave me that confidence.
I love that. Yeah, sorry, I'm completely unfamiliar with what you're describing.
You can't see, it may be pixelated here, but I am a white man. The confidence is built in. If I don't have the confidence, that's my own damn fault. But also, I was lucky enough to have a family who had encouraged me and my creative pursuits. And so I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? I don't write 30 minutes worth of good songs and the 10 people in the coffee shop don't like what I'm doing. Fine, I can handle that. And the reason I felt that way is because I knew there were people who cared about me in the world. And also I knew that any amount of embarrassment that I felt would go away soon, because I would have other opportunities just because of my station in life. I didn't have any money at the time. My parents didn't have any money, and their parents didn't have any money, but we had a lot of encouragement and we had very little resistance. And I did feel sort of cushioned in a certain way, like, and this is not going to end terribly. Nobody's going to beat me up over this. I'm just going to see what I can do.
Yeah. And you obviously believe that you had creative potential, right? I mean, it's not enough to just feel cushioned, right? You need to believe that, fundamentally that you have what it takes to write.
Yes.
I'm coming at this from someone who played music for a long time, but my composition sucked. And so I don't want to understate how that's a very distinct skill set that one needs to cultivate, but it seems like it came rather naturally for you.
I think so. And I don't know why exactly. I mean, at the root of it, I don't know why. I didn't have a lot of friends that would come over and play guitar with me or anything like that. Mostly I was just sitting alone in my room with a guitar, playing and making sounds. And I think out of that, and then the fact that I really liked to read, my mom started me reading really early, and I really enjoyed that. I think that combination is sort of what led me to becoming a songwriter.
So I'd love to focus on shortly after this coffee gig, you end up joining the band, the Drive-By Truckers, and you hit the road for a fairly intense life of touring, right? I mean, you had hundreds of shows a year. What was that transition like for you?
It was a very intense touring life. I mean, we were always gone, and we were always in a van, and we were sleeping on people's floors. And if we got a hotel, we would get one room and all of us would sleep in the one room. But most of the time, we were staying with friends for that first year or so. So there was not a lot of rest. There was a whole lot of excitement because I was 21 years old and playing music for people, and the people in the audience were extremely happy to be there. And it was, the venues were small, but the emotions were big. It was a rock and roll show, and it was very loud. And the band was just at that point where things start happening, where I call it where the hell did all these people come from? moment, where you've been touring and playing and touring and playing, and then all of a sudden there are people who are in the parking lot who know they're not going to get into the show because it's sold out, but they're still staying in the parking lot just to hear it through the doors or through the windows. But as far as like the experience that I was having, it was really exciting because I'd never been anywhere. I didn't notice so much how difficult it was physically because, yeah, it was, I don't know if I could handle it now. I probably couldn't do it now.
Yeah. At some point, you start to drink excessively and you end up doing drugs.
Yeah, I wanted to see what that was like, just what it felt like to do those drugs or to get that drunk or, I call it the slingshot effect because in the small towns, when you're raising a sheltered kid, you're kind of slowly pulling the slingshot back for 18 years. And then all of a sudden you let it go. And I had lived in such a mundane existence in such a cloistered kind of place that when I got out and saw the world, I wanted to take everything in, metaphorically and literally. And, also, yeah, the physical aspects of it had a lot to do with it. I mean, you ride 6 or 8 hours in a van and then you get out and you have to be in a good mood and, get up on stage and perform and then load all your stuff back into the van and go sleep for 3 or 4 hours on somebody's floor and then get up and do it all again about 300 times a year. So, yeah, that definitely had a part to play. But I think really now that I've got some hindsight, it seems to me like there were just unresolved issues from my childhood that kept it from being recreational, and that took me from a user to an abuser as far as drugs and alcohol went.
And what do you think some of those unresolved childhood issues were?
My parents were very young when I was born. My mom was 17, my dad was 19. And they did a good job. They were very present in my life and attentive. But still, with parents that young, nobody knows what the hell they're doing. And there was a lot of religious guilt and a lot of my dad's family, the Pentecostal side of the family, it was pretty close to a cult, very much fundamentalist religious sect, to put it politely. And so they were very close to their family. They were, very loving, very caring people, but also for a kid, growing up in this situation, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I was, because out of love, they thought that was the way they could love me the best. I was put in a situation where, that sort of conservative Christian viewpoint was bored into my brain. And I don't know if this was voluntary on their part, but made to feel like anything outside of that structure was a horrible transgression. And so I was, a little kid walking around feeling all this guilt and all this shame, and God's going to get mad at me and send me to hell, and the vengeful God and the angry God, and that was pretty heavy. That was a pretty heavy thing.
Yeah, and I guess you felt it was so imprinted that even when you're a 20-something touring, you're still feeling some of those feelings of guilt and shame?
Yes, and it was one of those things that sort of cycled. I feel like there was a part of me in my 20s that was saying, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens if you do all these things that you weren't supposed to be doing, that you were told that you would go to hell for. Let's just see what happens when you do those things. Because I'm the kind of person who, if I'm afraid of something, my instinct is to do it immediately. To conquer that fear. And none of those were healthy responses. So they all just kind of the snowball got bigger and bigger until finally I had no control over my life.
I mean, it got so bad at a certain point that your bandmates, they recognize you have a problem. They try to get you to go to rehab and you end up refusing. Tell me more about how bad it was. Like, how was that expressing itself? What kind of effects were you having on others?
I was drinking about a fifth a day, about a fifth of Jack Daniels a day, so a big old glass bottle of it. What you would buy at the store that should last you for a couple months. I was drinking one of those every day. And, if there were drugs around, I would do the drugs. Everything that I did was essentially in service of drinking more because that was the thing that worked for me, that hooked me. And most of the time I wasn't angry, especially not at first, not for the first few years of drinking that heavily. I was a funny, happy drunk, and then it just started shifting, when you pile those layers of exhaustion on top of each other and takes more and more alcohol to get what you feel like is the same buzz that you used to get, you start to get more angry and more aggressive. And I wasn't like a physically aggressive person, but I can be emotionally and psychologically aggressive in a way that is very vicious and very harmful. I was just a mean bastard. I would say mean things to people and it would hurt their feelings. And, I wasn't loyal to my first wife. I broke some promises. And the bottom line, you don't do that. You don't break promises. And I don't want to say this is because I was an addict, because it wasn't. The truth is it wasn't. The addiction just gave me something else to blame for it. So, addiction was a scapegoat for me because it's so easy to say, oh, I did those things because I'm drunk. People do it all the time now still in these half-assed fake apologies online. But there's a line in one of the old Drive-By Truckers songs that my friend Mike Cooley wrote. He says, the liquor don't make you do the thing, it just lets you. And I always loved that line.
I love that.
I thought it just allows you to be the asshole that you wanted to be.
So, you eventually leave the band. I mean, folks ask you to leave for a break and then it becomes a extended break and you keep drinking, right? I mean, it doesn't immediately stop the problem. And I'm wondering what finally led you to acknowledge that you had a problem and that you actually wanted to make changes.
I fell in love with somebody who had her shit together. And I did not think that she was going to stick around unless I got my shit together. And so I got sober and I wrote letters from rehab and I begged and I pleaded and I gave her proof that I wasn't going to fall back into my old ways. And I started doing the work and I started going to therapy. And, now 10 years later, I'm still sober and I'm much more effective as a person. And this situation is complicated for me now because what I did to her at that point, I would not do to someone now. I put a lot of weight, a lot of pressure, and a lot of responsibility for my own redemption, for lack of a better word, onto another person. And in my selfish brain, it looked like I have to do whatever it takes to win the heart of this person that I'm in love with. And now I see that that was not a fair thing. But at the time, it looked like a love story to me.
Yeah. Were you worried at the time, or maybe it didn't hit you because, again, you were in the throes of love, but that a dependency was forming? And so there was a fragility to your sobriety journey because the minute your wife, Amanda, left the scene, maybe you would go back to your old ways. Like your journey was inextricably linked to her existence and you're wanting her love, right?
Right. At first, I think I felt like they were linked in that way. But after just a few months, there were other rewards, and it became for me. You might get a different answer to that question if you asked her.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I did to her that was not fair. But I would never link somebody else to the responsibility of my survival or my growth as an individual. Like, I would never do that. But I don't think I even knew what codependent meant 10 years ago. I don't think I'd even gotten far enough to begin to understand that. I was just a mess,
Your song Live Oak alludes to your concerns that in giving up alcohol and drugs, it wouldn't just be the bad stuff that left you, that there might be some good stuff too that you lost in the process. Do you mind singing some of the opening of that song for us and then sharing more about the nature of this worry?
Sure, yeah, no problem. Let me get my guitar.
Oh, sure.
And I'll put the microphone here so you can hear me. Sounds okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right. There's a man who walks beside me. He is who I used to be. And I wonder if she sees him and confuses him with me. And I wonder who she's pining for on nights I'm not around. Could it be the man who did the things I'm living down? So there's the intro of that song. I think that's probably enough to explain what we're talking about. But yeah, so it really is kind of a murder ballad about this guy who's trying to redeem himself after being an outlaw in sometime in the deep past. And, he doesn't succeed. And then he wonders if, what version of himself was really the better version. I think for me, as time passed, I came to terms with the idea that there were good things and bad things about the person that I used to be. But at first it was really hard to do because there was a danger. At every turn, I was looking for ways to keep myself from backsliding. So I didn't want to romanticize what my life had been. For years after getting sober, I just looked at it with that was bad and this is good, sort of, binary judgment there.
Yeah. And would that make you hesitant to revisit your past in your music?
Yes.
That need to create psychological distance between you and your former self?
Yes. Or it would reduce the work to something less complex than it should have been.
Oh, because you were painting a very simplistic model of past Jason.
Exactly.
Past Jason was just awful. The worst.
Yes. This is what I used to be. Doesn't that suck? Isn't that terrible? Aren't we all glad I'm not that anymore?
Yeah, I see. Reductionist.
Yes. And that itself is a lie, is a revisionist personal history in the way that it's just not even true anymore. So, and I understand all of the past is a concept, and it's all filtered through the way we process information. However, I think part of the creative journey and the creative struggle is to try to see how close we can get, try to remove our own processing systems from the past and see it as clearly as possible. And that took a long time. That took a really long time for me.
We'll hear more from Jason about his life in recovery after the break. We'll be back in a moment with a slight change of plans. What have you realized, Jason, has stayed intact about you through your transition from alcoholic to someone, who is now 10 years sober? And I think part of my question is, you were concerned at one point, like, did they really like that guy? Like the old, the drunk Jason? And I'm wondering, as you straddled these two identities, right, these two very distinct psychological states, if you realize now that there are some fundamental parts of you that were there then and are there now that the people around you in your life really cherish.
Yes, all of it is still there. It's all still there. That was me, and this is me. Only now he gets to make more decisions, rather than look up and think, how did I wind up here, And I don't always make the right decision, I like to think my average is going up as time goes on, but I'm just able to make the decision because I don't have to choose to get another drink or to find whatever drug I was doing or to be around people because they have access to that or because they think it's okay for me to behave that way. Like, I just simply get to make the choices for myself. like the choice to be loyal to my wife and to my family. I get to make that choice,
Yeah.
and what time I go to bed, what time I get up in the morning, how much time I devote to my art every day. These are things that I get to decide for myself now.
Yeah. I'd love to dig into the role songwriting has played in your sobriety because, it strikes me that as a songwriter, you're kind of getting this constant pulse of where you're at emotionally, right? Based on what you're expressing in your music or what you're finding yourself incapable of expressing, right? You're getting signals in both directions. And I think very few of us have a profession that serves as a mirror of sorts, that's constantly reflecting our emotional states back to us.
Well, there was a huge shift in the reason I wrote songs around that period of time. So when I got sober, I was very, raw, like emotionally sunburned, Up until that point, I had been writing for an external audience. I had really been writing songs to show people what my experience was. This is my family, this is my father, this is the place where I grew up. But then I sort of, unconsciously started writing songs, where I was looking at myself and I was trying to make some sort of estimation of who I was and if I was doing okay.
Yeah.
And that shift happened right then. And, I hate the term like confessional songwriter because I think that's very limiting and sort of derogatory. But I think I went from trying to communicate with the outside world to trying to communicate with myself and trying to reflect on myself and understand myself. Once I started doing that, that became very addictive in itself, and the reward of that was such that I wanted to continue to do it. And so it turned off the part of my brain that is judging and just opened up the part of my brain that is curious, and it just flew out, For a couple albums after that, it just flew out. It kind of still does.
There's another song on one of your albums called It Gets Easier, and you sing, it gets easier, but it never gets easy. First of all, I think that resonates with so many people, not even just those navigating addiction, but just navigating life and the challenges of life. I think that I found so much resonance in those lyrics. And, I think this touches upon some of the themes that we've already talked about, which is about, villainizing past self and maybe glorifying present self because you're trying to create as much distance as possible between those two, right?
I mean, it's easy to tell yourself that, oh, I fixed it. It's fixed. It's solved. To go on that kind of cruise control and think, well, I haven't had a drink today, so I can't hurt anybody too bad or I can't do anything too terrible. And, that can stunt your growth as an adult by saying this one big issue, like it's a version of romanticizing addiction, and not necessarily in a positive way. But if you look at it as this huge, all-encompassing beast that's in control of your life completely, well, then that means the inverse of that must also be true. So you assume that, like, if addiction is this big, huge monster that has been in charge of your whole life, then once you've conquered that, quote unquote, you assume that the inverse is also true, that, now I've solved my problem. And as we all know, it is never as simple as I have one problem.
Yeah. Having gone through, a very arduous time when you were, so often under the influence and then navigating sobriety, what's the biggest thing you learned about yourself? What's the biggest thing that changed in terms of your self-perception, your understanding of who you are?
When I got sober, I had no idea how far I was from actually being a satisfied and contributing member of society. I thought that, I've got a job. I entertain people. I'm able to get in the van and ride to these shows and play these shows. People like me. I'm funny. I have enough money to pay my bills. I'm doing great. I'm doing a good job, but I had no clue how many millions of miles away I was from being a satisfied and self-actualized person. How much more I had to learn about myself because I had just been putting that off for so long and so aggressively stunting my own growth because it hurt so much to learn that I wasn't perfect. And as a flip side to that, I didn't realize how much I would really enjoy the process of learning those things. I mean, going to therapy, and also just searching on my own, going into every situation thinking, how do I handle this as somebody who knows myself and loves myself? And, that process has been really challenging in the best possible way for me. And it makes me feel like at the end of every day, I have attempted to make myself better. Therefore, I have attempted to make the world better.
It's so interesting what I'm hearing, and this is reminding me of something you said early in the interview, is that the very same personality trait that leads you to fear something then immediately want to do it, like you did with alcohol. So the thing that got you to become an alcoholic, which is you feared that whole scene and then you jumped right in, is maybe the very same instinct that led you to try and reach self-actualization, which is, I imagine you were filled with fear. Like, what will I discover if I go deep? What will I discover if I open this brain of mine and try and probe? Maybe I'll just jump right in.
Yeah.
Like, is that kind of a similar pattern that you have that actually just conferred benefits in this case?
Yeah, I think it's the exact same thing. I do. I think I don't know if anybody's made that. I don't think anybody's made that point to me before. So I appreciate that. But it is the same exact thing. And I think some of us are the kind of people who, stand at the edge of Niagara Falls and think, I wonder what would happen if I jumped in. And I don't do that, so there's a few of us are the kind of people who do jump in. You don't want to be that kind either. And there's
I
some
don't
of
even,
us,
for what it's worth, I don't even go to the edge of the thing to look over. I'm like behind the guardrails, some, 50, 100 feet away. All right.
That's probably the healthiest way to handle the whole situation. Like, somebody go take a picture of that and bring it back here and show it to me.
I'll just Google it. Niagara Falls image. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Done.
I'll get a t-shirt. I was there. But some of us have to go right up to the edge, and I am that person. I have to go right up to the edge. And I've always been that person, and that's just how I am. And so, I like to test all those boundaries. And, luckily there are healthy ways for an artist to do that. I mean, that's probably why I'm an artist,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love when we can reinterpret what we initially code in our lives as being liabilities and weaknesses. And then you start to think, well, what are the flip sides of it? Like, what are the benefits? And it seems like in your case, Jason, that it would have been so easy to say, oh, I have this really frustrating habit where when I fear something, I jump right in and I can't wait to just rid myself of that instinct. And yet here you are in a later stage of your life learning that there's an upside, and that when you channel some of those very same instincts in the right direction, you can have beautiful changes that emerge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. I'm wondering if you can close us out with the song "Cover Me Up," which is a beautiful ode to your wife, Amanda. And yeah, I would love to say that that this is purely because it's consonant with the show's theme, but the reality is that I'm not going to not take advantage of the fact that I can get serenaded by Jason Isbell. And so all you slight changers listening, this is also a selfish desire of mine, which is to hear one of my favorite songs sung by one of my favorite musicians.
All right, I will do my best. Let me put my microphone a little closer and I'll tune the guitar here. Let me take one of my earbuds out. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, but it's the end of the day and my voice is warmed up and I can, but I'll do it now in D. heart on the run, keeps a hand on the gun. You can't trust anyone. I was so sure what I needed was more. Tried to shoot out the sun. The days when we raged, we flew off the page. Such damage was done. But I made it through, 'cause somebody knew I was meant for someone.
Hey, thanks for listening. Join me next week when I talk with Nora McInerney, host of the podcast, Terrible, Thanks for Asking. Nora lost her husband to brain cancer in 2014, and in the months and years following his death, Nora found comfort and meaning in helping others navigate their grief. People started to see her as a grief doula of sorts. Over time, these responsibilities began to mount, and Nora felt overwhelmed, but she didn't think she had a way out.
Are you allowed to quit anything? Winners never quit, quitters never win. Although, was I going to win the Best Widow Award? I don't know. I think in a lot of ways, like I'd inadvertently built this identity that had become a cage for me.
A Slight Change of Plans is created, written, and executive produced by me, Maya Shankar. The Slight Change family includes our senior producer, Tyler Green, our producer and fact-checker, Emily Rostek, our editors, Kate Parkinson-Morgan and Jen Guerra, and our sound engineers, Ben Tolliday and Andrew Bastola. Luis Guerra wrote our delightful theme song, and Ginger Smith helped arrange the vocals. A Slight Change of Plans is a production of Pushkin Industries, so big thanks to everyone there. And of course, a very special thanks to Jimmy Lee. You can follow A Slight Change of Plans on Instagram at Dr. Maya Shankar. See you next week.
Cover me up, I know you're enough to use me for good. Was it good? Was it okay?
Oh my God, it was beautiful.
Okay, thank you.
Life is made, everyone. Life is made.
That's awesome. Well, thank you.
All right, everyone. That was a preview of A Slight Change of Plans from Pushkin Industries. Hear more from A Slight Change of Plans wherever you get your podcasts. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for listening to The Addicted Mind.